brainstorming for events. So I'll be recording it on Zoom also, so anyone who's not here can get the link. I'll put it up on YouTube, so we have it in case you all want to refer to it as well. So if you haven't met me, my name is Lori Salazar, and I'm the Assistant Director for Student Organizations. So you might have emailed me or set up a Zoom meeting with me already, or communicate through newsletter or Discord, any of those things. So if you have questions at all during the presentations, feel free to let me know. And then I'll go ahead and have you all introduce yourself so we know who you are in the room, of just your name and the RSO that you're part of, and if you have a position.
Hi, I'm Abigail, and I am in sports business, and
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you all for introducing yourselves. So today I'm going to go over just event planning 101. So go over some tips and tricks, and then many of you have already worked with Astra and submitting event scheduling, things like that, but I'll still go over it in case you all have any questions on our end. You know, seeing us face to face is different through email. So hopefully I can be helpful in that way. And then any questions on reimbursements also, since that's related to event planning. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is one of my favorite quotes that I always bring up when I was a student as well in a student organization, that I would tell other members: if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And so something that I would always remind them, if we're hosting an event and we're planning to set up at a certain time, you want to be early. And just to be able to prepare and get everything ready. You don't want to be scrounging around because people are either coming in on time or they're coming in late, especially when you're hosting your big events that you're going to be having either in the winter or the spring. I know this fall was a lot of learning and a lot of new things, being back on campus from being in a completely virtual space and all the rules and regulations and things like that. But something to remind them as you're preparing for the winter and the spring, that we always want to be early, just to make sure that we're there and prepared for our event. So we already did this just as introduction, since we're a little bit of a smaller group. So for the agenda today, just going to talk a little bit about brainstorming for an event. If you have an event coming up, start thinking about that, and kind of some things that you either have questions on or need to start planning. We'll talk about budgeting and logistics as far as facilities and media requests, some marketing and event details as well. And I'll talk about reimbursements, since that's a new process for this academic year, since last academic year was all online. So for you all to brainstorm, just something to think about. This is always what's helpful when coming into the presentation, since we're going to be talking about events. If you have an event coming up, whether it's in the next couple of weeks or it's in the winter or spring, start brainstorming about things that you might need for that event. I think that will be really helpful to get us started, and start to write it down or type it up in your computer as a starting point, as we're starting to go through all of those things and we're thinking about budgeting or reimbursements. You're adding those things to your to-do list. So really take this presentation to help brainstorming your event, your next event that you have coming up. So this is something to think about, is the 5 W's for when you're planning on an event and kind of knowing your why, right? So why are you putting on this event? Is it your annual event that you always have? Is a new event you're trying to host? Be creative, engage members. Is it your annual event that always happens? Who is your audience? That's helpful, especially when it comes to marketing. Are you marketing to all students? You got to remember to market on the digital screens and Benson and the RLCs. Are you marketing to specific students by grade level, what it may be? Do I need to put it in the ASG newsletter that goes to all students, social media, things like that? What type of event will it be? Where's your ideal location? So like you all may know with the event planning, Spaces are really limited on campus because a lot of classrooms are booked with classes, and you've even seen during this fall quarter, some classes are actually outside just because of limited capacity inside buildings. And then when will your event be? So really thinking about that. And I would take this also and report back to your club of when you're starting to talk about that event, or if you're planning it, or if you have a committee to really go over these things, because this is the foundation for your event. So everybody knows why, who, what, where, and when. So the first thing is budgeting. So have you all heard of discretionary funding? Yes, everybody. Okay, so this is something that I just want to go over because it could get confusing for some, is that there's club funds and there's discretionary funding. And then of course there's fundraising or ticket sales. So with your club funds, if some of you were new members on the e-board coming in this academic year, you might not have known at the beginning of the quarter what your club fund balance was. And so you can always email the CSI email and we'll direct you to Arcelia, who is our senior admin assistant. She's physically in the office Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And so you could always come into the office or you can email her and she'll give you your RSO balance. So especially if you've been spending money throughout this fall and you want to know what your starting balance is going to be for the winter quarter or spring quarter or whatever it may be, she can pull that report for you. As long as it's the president or treasurer, because those are the only ones that are on the roster approved to be able to see your financial report.
If I'm correct, we're not allowed to pull the bank account. So where is that money being
Yeah, so that's through our, everyone has an RSO account through our CSI office, so it's under our CSI budget. So it's your specific account attached to a budget string. And so it's not like an official bank account where you can like go in and have a card, things like that. But we do everything processed through our office. So if you ever want to know at any time what your balance is or what transactions have been, we can pull that for you. So it's all tied under our CSI budget. So great question. You're not allowed an off-site, off-campus bank account unless for some reason it's a national requirement. So I know some national organizations, but usually that has to get approved through us. And because your club account is not connected to like a credit card or anything like that, we do at CSI have two types of cards that we can assist you with any online purchasing. We have a T card and a P card. So T card, anything travel, so airline, lodging, so that's hotels, anything like that, we can assist with purchasing for you. And then our purchasing card, so anything from like Target, or if you're going to eat somewhere on campus and we can pay for things in advance through a purchasing card, things like that, or Target, you can send us the shopping list and we'll go and purchase it for you, or we can tag along with you, anything like that. And so, or any online payments, you send us the link, then we can always register for you with our credit card. That's helpful because when you go onto the reimbursement process, instead of having to reimburse a club member, if you plan enough in advance and we use the purchasing card, you don't have to worry about a club member, let's say, being short hundreds of dollars or whatever it may be. And so like one of our chartered student organizations, they have a big event coming up and it's a couple $1,000s. So they're using our purchasing card. And so you just want to, we'll always make sure that you have money in your RSO balance so your account doesn't go into the negative, or you've used discretionary funding through ASG. So hopefully that helped give some information. With discretionary funding, did you all submit any discretionary funding applications this quarter? Yeah. One, you both didn't? No, okay, no worries. So it's offered every single quarter by ASG. Discretionary funding is a reimbursement process that is approved through ASG. And so they can fund up to certain percentages for different parts of your event. So like apparel and supplies, all are allocated different percentages to be able to apply for. So they can't fully 100% fund an event, but they can fund a portion of it according to their bylaws. So I highly recommend If you haven't, make sure you do apply. The ASG chair will send it every week one of the first quarter of the winter quarter and spring quarter and the fall quarter. So always look out for that email. And that's why it's important to have your roster up to date with your president and your treasurer, because it'll get emailed to them. And then we'll always send a reminder as well through our RSO email and our RSO Discord. So that's why those things are important to have. So with just discretionary funding, it's really supplemental funding for your event. And so if you're planning any scale event, so even if it's from a meeting to a larger scale event, ASG wants to help and support that with supplemental funding. So whether they can fund maybe 50% of your apparel, or they can fund your stickers, or food if it's a cultural show or whatever it might be. So you want to make sure you utilize that and get that applications in. Usually by week 2 of every quarter is when they're due, just so that they make sure they plan ahead and they're able to allocate what they can for that quarter. Any questions with discretionary funding? For those of you who have processed it, I have questions. No. For those of you who didn't, was it just like you had money in your budget, or you just didn't know about it?
I think we didn't know about it, but it was due, and we had to like plan for all of our events.
Okay.
Kind of like more dependent on outside.
Mhm. Oh yeah, no worries. So it's good to know about and to share that information. So even if you're just a representative, just to know that these funds are available. So it's good to report back and say like, hey, did we utilize discretionary funding? You might have utilized it and not even known, or just remember to look out for those emails, or as you're planning for events in the winter and for the spring that you could utilize discretionary funding. We have so many RSOs, and our discretionary funding is about $90,000 academic year. So it's a good amount of money, but when you think about 170 RSOs and 3 quarters, they try to do their best to spread it out through every quarter, so they're not spending all of their money in the fall or all of it in the spring. So even if they have percentages caps for something like apparel, which is 50%, they may fund 30% because they want to make sure they could still fund your promotional items and your supplies or whatever it may be. Or they'll say, hey, we can't fund every club meeting for you to have snacks, but what's in a really important club meeting where you're going to have maybe a speaker or new members be at, and we'll fund that meeting. So also don't think it has to be just large scale. It could also be for smaller scale things as well. So, and then fundraising, ticket sales, anything like that to also help fund different events that you have. We do have what's called e-markets. And so unfortunately, officially, like Venmo or Cash Apps, things like that are approved by the university. If I don't see it, I don't know about it. But we do have what's called e-markets. And so a lot of our chartered student organizations will use this, or for the big shows, they'll use this for ticket sales, because it's basically a website that we can create on our end that can collect any information that you want for a online credit card sale. So if you're going to do an event, we can get their first name, last name, SCU email, department, major, shirt size, anything, which you can't necessarily do in Venmo, or it's a little bit harder to organize, or whatever apps you might be using. So e-markets, we could do a pretty quick turnaround as long as we get a little bit of advance notice. And if your RSO hasn't created an online store before, it's just having us to create one from scratch. But if you have done one before, it's a little bit easier. And that's pretty easy as well, because you don't have to worry about depositing the money and coming to CSI, and any money that you make, putting it into your account. Everything is through a report and it's all tracked. So once it goes into e-markets, it goes straight into your RSO account. So that's also a little bit easier. It just takes planning ahead. And I know things like Venmo and PayPal are a lot easier, but the university says no to that. So if you can, for the larger scale events, things like that, that you plan ahead, do e-markets. We can print the report as much as you need to really show all the information that you're collecting. And so like yearbooks is doing it for yearbook payments, or anyone that wants to be to get archived yearbooks. So alumni maybe lost a yearbook, they can put their name and their email, ask for a certain year, and then they're able to pull a report from that also, instead of just like contacting a random person and not getting a response. So that's where e-markets can be really helpful. And you can customize it and add an image, add any information that you want. And so if you're ever interested in doing an e-markets, just email us and we'll send you the Google form, and it's pretty straightforward to fill out. So I went over the two types of RSO accounts. So your club account, that's everything that you put into. So think of it as your bank account through the office, but you don't have a specific like credit or debit card, and then discretionary funding. So when you're thinking about planning your event, it's good to review your account balance. So check with your president and treasurer, have them get that from Arsalia. And then discretionary funding, make sure you don't miss the deadline, or plan in advance that there's an email that we need to look out for discretionary funding, and make sure we fill out our application.
Like, for example, how do you recommend,
Yeah, so dues, definitely we can collect that through e-markets as well. And so we create and if we have time after, I could show you some examples of what other stores look like, but you can collect dues. And so it could be as detailed as like a national member and a non-national member. Like if you provide a discount or a senior or whatever, they can do a drop down and select what kind of member they are, if there's any price differences. And then it'll be a direct credit card payment on there. And so that sometimes it's a little bit easier to track. Versus Venmo, you just have to like go through and be swiping to make sure everyone paid. This is just like it'll come in an Excel sheet and you're able to organize it however you want. And it gives them, whatever information you need. So as a member, if you need their email, member type or anything like that, year, any additional information that you want, you can put that into e-markets and it can create and generate for you. And then, like I said, you don't have to worry about coming into the office and giving like Arsalia all this money or whatever it may be to put your dues inside your RSO account. Good question. So some logistics for you all. Some of it might be review and some of it might be new, but it's just important to always be checking the health and safety for our SCU campus meeting and events as it changes, as protocols get updated. So it's good to look at this as you plan for the winter and the spring, of when masks are required, when food is allowed, things like that. So it's separated by meeting type, location, audience, which is really important. So if you're inviting, let's say, speakers or people from the community to come, it tells you the maximum gathering size, your food and drink is discouraged, things like that. So it's important to look at this when you're planning an event, if you're having any type of panel or showcase or anything like that. This will especially apply to the spring when we have a lot of our fairs or showcases that happen or talent shows, anything like that. This is important to look at and will constantly be updated. And so you could always, and we have it available on our CSI website as well. But if you forget where it's at, you could just put fall guidelines SCU and you'll be able to pull up through health and safety. So the event request form, you all may be familiar with this, and so it's just kind of review, but I'll just go over the importance of why submitting them in advance, especially when we come into planning for the winter and the spring. We are able to now book classrooms for the winter, so if you have any club meetings that are going to be happening in classrooms for the winter quarter, you can go ahead and submit those through the event planning request form. Anything in Locatelli or Benson, we can do a year in advance. But when it comes to classrooms, usually it's about week 8 of every quarter, then we could submit for the next quarter. So when it comes into the winter, it's just another thing to remember. Winter of week 8, we could start to book for classrooms in the spring. So that's important that you all starting now can book your classrooms for winter for any type of events or meetings that you'll have. Because we have to wait on all the classrooms and professors and all of that to confirm their spaces. before we can go and put our meetings in. We ask at least 5 days in advance, just is super helpful when we're booking spaces. And if they're getting a lot of requests, especially for classrooms right now, it might take a little bit longer. And so for us through CSI, we're making sure we have all the information, we're submitting it to the event scheduler, and then the event scheduler sends us the confirmation. And so that's why it just takes a little bit of time. Some of them, if it's an evening event or a weekend event, we also have to email facilities or campus safety to make sure the room is scheduled to be unlocked, things like that. So that's why we ask to be in advance. If it's anything outdoors or in Locatelli, they usually ask 15 business days prior, just because the setups are different. Outdoor space, usually for facilities, we have to schedule for the sprinklers to be off. And if you need tables and chairs, they need to know in advance to schedule a facilities team to have those things outside. Something that happens a lot during the first 2 weeks of every quarter is Benson will run out of tabling capacity. So if you ran into this at all with our office, they only have 10 physical tables. So when you're looking through maybe the calendar portal for Ad Astra, and when you're trying to see if certain rooms are available or tabling spaces, you might say, well, you're saying that Benson's not available, but I see there's maybe 3 extra tables on the scheduling grid, and it might just be because 10 spots are already filled simultaneously. And so we might email you back to adjust, like normally 10 to 2 is the prime time for tabling. So we might say anytime after 2, or on certain days it's already booked. So how can we assist you? So that's why it's better to book in advance as much as you can. If you're going to be tabling, especially now for the winter quarters, start putting those in. And then if you're using Mally, just make sure you go on their website. They have all of their schedules for the different rooms to see when it's available, and then you can submit your request through the event scheduler. Sorry, through our event planning request form. Are there any questions specifically with the event request form? Awesome. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Thanks for coming in. For Mally, it's separated, like the courts are separated between 3 courts. And so I believe one has to be open at all time for open play. So if you're able to, you can request 1 or you can request 2. That's courts inside. You can also request Bellamy Field and the multi-purpose room as well. So if you're doing any type of interactive event where maybe a classroom wouldn't work out, or Benson's not available, or you want to be able to play some sort of sport, you could definitely utilize the courts and Bellamy Field. So great question. Awesome. So facilities, just a reminder, their hours are super early. So even if you have an evening event, you could still utilize facilities for your tables and chairs, anything that you're doing outside. They'll just have them kind of set aside for you, or they're able to set them up. And then usually they ask that if you break things down and put them off to the side, so that they're not having to charge like someone to come in after the hours to go and pick up the event, and then that charges to your RSO account. So only fill out the facilities form for outdoor spaces or larger classrooms, things like that, that already don't have furniture in them, but most classrooms do. And then anything with Benson and Locatelli, they have furniture. So that's just something to think about for any outdoor events. Probably not so many in the winter, since we don't know what the rain's going to look like, but more in the spring, we have a lot of outdoor events that are requested. For media requests, it's the same thing. Sometimes we will get through our event request form, like for microphones or things like that. We don't provide that. So you just want to make sure in advance you are putting in your media requests for specific either classrooms if you need something additional, or you need something for an outdoor event, or something that's extra, like let's say for a talent show in Locatelli or things like that, where you need extra equipment. You want to make sure you're indicating that. When it comes to, I don't want to confuse you, sorry. When it comes to Locatelli and Benson, you can put that information on the event request form because Locatelli and Benson like to handle all of their media, but when it comes to a classroom and you need something additional or anything outdoors, make sure you're doing your media requests in advance. Awesome. And then always when your events are approved, this is just a snippet of the email that we send over, just as a reminder for any tables, chairs, media requests, things like that. So especially for anyone who's going to be taking on doing event requests in the winter and the spring, just to make sure when they get the confirmation emails, they read through it. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward when it comes to classrooms and anything in Benson and Locatelli. Forms and contracts. So this is important to look at if you're ever working with either a speaker or an outside company that you want to visit our CSI website. For contracts, RSOs are to never sign a contract. Our director for CSI will actually be the one to sign the contract. So just remember that you all don't sign anything because then you become liable. You want the university to be able to sign it. So that's important, as we might have more outdoor facilitators or speakers or DJs or whatever that might come in the winter and spring for events, that CSI is the one to sign it. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to be liable if something happens as a student. You want the university to be able to have that agreement and everything like that. And then just some information on marketing. I think the most important thing is to always think about putting your flyers up on the digital screens and the RLCs and in Benson as well. So we have the tiny URLs here, and I'll also email the presentation in our November newsletter. So you have access to these links, or you can email me and I can give you access to the links as well. But you want to make sure you're also advertising there. And then we also have the ASG weekly email. And if you tag us on social media, we'll also repost your event as well. Now with event details, as we're starting to kind of close up, because I know some of you do have class, just for things for you all to think about. You know, we went over logistics and some event details with marketing and facilities and all of those things, and the event planning request form, which is super important. But it's thinking about the day of the event. What are things that you need either from your team, committees, things like that. So do you have all your materials? Again, are you ready to arrive early and be able to set up and have your event ready for students to come? And do you have everything ready for you just in case? And so always just questions to think about for you all as leaders, but then also if you're leading a committee or anything like that, things for them to think about as they plan for the event and thinking about the day of. And after the event, important thing is to turn in the funds and reimbursements to the front desk. But I think also something that we might miss is reflecting on like what worked well, what didn't go well, how can we improve, and keeping those notes, especially if it's maybe an annual event that only happens once a year. You want the new e-board for the next academic year to be able to have those notes. So being able to have something maybe in a Google Drive or a folder, things like that, that keeps your notes for what were well, what are things we forgot, or things we did last minute because we didn't realize we needed. That will be helpful for the next event to be successful. Now I'm going to go over reimbursements. It might feel like there's a lot on the screen because there is, but we do have it all on our CSI website. So if you just type in, like in Google, CSI reimbursements, SEU, you'll be able to pull this up. But it's just important for us to go over, especially as reimbursements are starting to come in and we're used to being a fully online process. Now we're a mix of online and in-person when it comes to reimbursements. So I think the most important part is right here with the reimbursement process. So any reimbursements less or equal to $200 are physically turned into the CSI office. So we're located in Locatelli on the second floor. So it's a form that looks like this, and it's a carbon copy, so it's really old school. But that's because the forms go to different people, and especially when it's under $200, you'll be getting reimbursed through petty cash. And so once your form is processed, then our Celia will let you know that your cash is ready to be picked up for anything under $200, so that we try to get a quicker turnaround for you to get reimbursed. And then you'll attach your receipts to here. If you had a discretionary funding, you're getting a notice of legislation that they'll tell you to print out and attach to this form. So you want to make sure we have the physical forms in the office. And so we do have a PDF version of the form, but that's for any reimbursements that are over $200, because those ones you're emailing. So that's just something to remember. If it's under 200, it's the physical form that we have at the office, and it goes physically to CSI. Anything more than 200, it's turned in via email with the receipts to the ASG president, and then it'll either be by check or direct deposit. And so our Celia or Kevin Ham, which is the ASG vice president, will give you that information when they email you to say that your reimbursement has been approved and will be processed. Any questions on that, since that might be something that you all haven't done yet? Yeah. The ASG vice president does change every year. So great question. So we'll try to we always keep the website updated as much as we can. And if for some reason you don't get a response, if you're emailing the ASG vice president, feel free to email me, and then I'll follow up to see where your reimbursement is. Good. Okay. So just other things to think about when you're doing your reimbursements, especially when you're submitting them in person, it's just making sure that the receipts are itemized. They show the last 4 digits of the credit card number, just so that we can confirm that it is the certain student that paid. And the invoice is marked as paid. Same for when it's digital online, being able to see that information so we can accurately process your reimbursement. If not, we'll have to email you and say, the receipt doesn't show the last 4 digits of the credit card number. Can you please send us a revised receipt? And then it just takes a longer process. So just make sure if you're doing anything online, you're catching the right invoice, because I know things like, I think it's custom ink. When you pay through the front page on the website, it'll say paid, but it won't show the last 4 digits of your credit card number. That's something that they email you. So we need the formal invoice. So it's just little details to look out for. But again, we have it on the website so that, you know, your president or your treasurer, or whoever you have that's in charge of maybe filling out the reimbursement form, you want to make sure that they're following these steps, just so that it doesn't delay the process of being reimbursed.